someone who I wanted to have on the show for quite some time, who has been a courageous voice for liberty against the national security state and the war machine. He's an independent journalist and also host of System Update on Rumble, so make sure you guys subscribe to his Rumble feed. It is Glenn Greenwald. Glenn, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you, Charlie. Thanks for having me.
Glenn, let's start with this Anti-Semitism Awareness Act bill. I mean, you don't like Jew hatred. I don't either. But why is the federal government sprinting to try to create more speech restrictions and to give money to a bureaucratic leviathan to restrict our freedoms and liberties? Walk us through this. There's many elements here that I find interesting. Glenn, what is your reaction?
Yeah, so obviously, if you believe in free speech, it necessarily means you defend views not only that you dislike, but often find repellent. Obviously, a big free speech controversy over the past decade has been attempts to silence or control speech in the name of stopping racism or xenophobia or Islamophobia or misogyny, whatever. Nobody has to say they like those things in order to object to the censorship efforts. And the same is true with anti-Semitism. The problem of what just happened in the House was, just to focus narrowly on what they actually did, was there's federal anti-discrimination law that applies to places like educational institutions and public accommodations where anti-discrimination is prohibited. And anti-Semitism is already part of the body of discrimination that is already prohibited. What the House just did was that they adopted this massively expansive definition of anti-Semitism that places in Europe and that Israel has been advocating for a long time. And within this definition are examples of the kind of anti-Semitism that is now prohibited. And they incorporated not only this expanded definition into federal law, but also the examples themselves. What the law says explicitly, we're incorporating not just the definition, but the examples. And some of the examples are things like saying that a particular Jewish individual seems to have more loyalty to Israel than they do to the United States, criticizing Israel in a way that seems to impose on them double standards, meaning you're criticizing them in a way that you don't criticize other democratic states. It prohibits you from saying that you think Jewish people are responsible for the death of Jesus. It prohibits you from comparing the behavior of the Israeli state to some of the war crimes or crimes against humanity committed by Nazis. Now, a lot of these views might be repellent, but they are absolutely within the realm of free speech to say any of those things. And the thing that's most disturbing is that you're allowed to do it about any other kind of person. You're allowed to say, for example, that, oh, those evangelicals over there seem to prioritize Israeli interests over American interests. That's perfectly fine. You can criticize other countries in any way you want, including with double standards. The one thing you cannot do is express this opinion about any individual who's Jewish or about the state of Israel in particular. And that's why it's such a direct attack on First Amendment free speech rights. And that's for the reason why, I don't think it's controversial to say that DC is run by a lot of very well-organized and well-financed lobbies. You have Planned Parenthood and the NRA and, big tech and Wall Street and pharmaceutical companies, and the pro-Israel lobby is a major force in Washington. But then you also have people in Congress who, for various religious or cultural reasons, really do love the state of Israel. And then you also have people who believe it's an important component of our national security, which is fine to think all those things, but that doesn't justify assaults on the free speech rights of Americans to protect this foreign country.
No, and it certainly doesn't. It doesn't support trying to loop in criticism of the bill as if you're in favor of anti-Semitism. There's a whole nother wrinkle to this, which is if you're against the bill, sometimes you want more anti-Semitism to occur. So, Glenn, I want to highlight this, though. Speaker Johnson bypassed the committee process. So typically these things get marked up in a committee. This was thrown onto the floor, bypassing a promise that he made that everyone would have 72 hours to read the bill. This is while all the campus protests that are happening, the vast majority of which is constitutionally protected speech. Glenn, can you go deeper into kind of the pressure campaign where it seems D.C. can only agree on a couple things: spying on America, borrowing money we don't have, restricting speech, and financing wars that don't matter? Glenn.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, let's go back to when the members of the House of Representatives who successfully removed Kevin McCarthy from the speakership, where actually first they refused to put him as speaker until he granted a variety of concessions that even a lot of Democrats admitted were necessary reforms of the House, because Nancy Pelosi before Kevin McCarthy, even Paul Ryan before him, And now Speaker McCarthy had consolidated so much power in House leadership and in the speakership position that basically the rest of the House were just decorative. They were just kind of there and had no power whatsoever. And obviously that's not the way the House is supposed to work. So they demanded all these reforms to ensure that the speaker couldn't control everything, that members of Congress, as you say, had the right to read things, had the right to pass things through committee, had the right to control what gets to the House floor. Mike Johnson, even after you watched Kevin McCarthy get deposed for violating all those, he made those promises again. He is now systematically violating almost every one of them because he knows that the Republicans cannot remove him because the Democrats have promised that as long as he serves their agenda, which he has done very faithfully, including reversing his long-held positions to do so, like opposition to more funding for the war in Ukraine, keeping that horrific war going. He was on my show where he talked about the evils of warrantless eavesdropping and said, we will never renew FISA without reforms. He then led the way to renew FISA without reforms at the behest of the CIA and the Biden White House. He swore that the FBI does not deserve a brand new federal headquarters building by spending $9 billion to build it. That was one of his main complaints about the FBI. And then he oversaw the appropriation of that money. So he has the protection of the Democratic Party as long as he does their bidding to do anything he wants. So he can ignore all those promises he made to the dissatisfied members of the more populist wing of the Republican Party because he has the protection of Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi and the rest of them. So to take this bill and throw it onto the House floor, and there were, overwhelming support in both political parties. There were only 21 Republicans who voted no, 70 Democrats who voted no, so overwhelmingly both caucuses agreed. It's because they see this political opportunity to claim that there's rampant anti-Semitism in the United States, that Jewish students are being endangered, creating a kind of moral panic that we've had about racial minorities or trans people, that they're subject to hate speech that might incite violence or a genocide against them, and therefore we need to control speech. It's the same mentality, just directed to a different minority group. And there's obviously a lot of political benefit to doing this among powerful groups, and therefore neither political party wanted to get on the wrong side of that.
So wait, just 2 minutes in the segment. Mike Johnson went on your show trying to brag about, did I hear that correctly, that he spoke to you about FISA protections? When was that? That's
yeah, it was just like 3 months before he became speaker. It was the day that FBI Director Christopher Wray went to the committee and he grilled them. But he, but these were like, Charlie, these were like passionate convictions he was defending. They weren't just throwaway lines from my show. He elaborated on them. He's a constitutional law professor. And so imagine my amazement to watch him then lead the way, not just a yes vote, but lead the way, strategize to ensure those things pass.
No, I think that's such a powerful point because he also came on our show and was complaining about some FBI thing. And so we don't have a ton of time to dive into this in this segment, but, we debate this sometimes. What motivates these people or turns these people? I mean, are they weak? Are they blackmailed? About a minute and a half. I want to have you riff on this, Glenn, because our audience is like 99%. He's blackmailed, and I'm not totally convinced of that. I think it's just the weight of the security state just collapsed him. That's my working theory. Glenn, what is your reaction?
Yeah, we do know that political blackmail has been used by the U.S. security state agencies for a long time. J. Edgar Hoover had dossiers on many political officials. That's how he was able to run the FBI for 6 decades. Everyone was petrified of him. But I don't like to make blackmail accusations without evidence, and we have none in Mike Johnson's case. I think it's more that, when he was asked, why did you change your mind? He said, I went to a briefing. They bring these people into the bowels of American power, the Situation Room, the blinking NSA room, and they have people with medals on their chest and very powerful people come and treat them like dignitaries and say, you're in real power now. And that means being responsible and understanding our need to spy on Americans without warrants. And they know that power that they now have, this kind of prestige getting into the inner circle, is dependent upon them serving an agenda that they had long said they opposed. And human nature craves power, and they're willing to make those compromises to do it. I think that it's that more than anything else. So,
Glenn, let me ask you, I want to dive into this. Can you talk about this kind of these shows that the intel agencies put on in these skiffs? I think this is really important, where no phone, no staff, so it's just Speaker Johnson. We kind of call this the woo-woo show, where they kind of show you a lot, but it's like half-truths and half-lies. From all of your excellent reporting that you've done, what happens in these skiffs, and how could Mike Johnson go from a fire-breathing Fourth Amendment advocate on the Glenn Greenwald show to a capitulating Bush Cheney spy on everything that moves hack? Your working hypothesis, so please, yes.
Yeah, I remember when we were doing the Snowden reporting, which went on for, 2.5 years, and we were able to show that the NSA in secret, even unbeknownst to most members of Congress, had converted the internet into a, range of mass domestic warrantless surveillance directed not just at foreign populations, but the American population as well. It was obviously a big deal. It was very controversial because no one knew that the US government and the NSA were doing that. And the NSA, a couple months after we began, invited 60 Minutes into like the secret parts of the NSA. And the 60 Minutes was so excited. They were like showing the camera with the like codes being opened on the door. They love all these toys. People get enamored of them, thinking like this is some kind of futuristic world. And they're so grateful to be let into the inner sanctum. Even though if you look at the 60 Minutes report, it was just so funny because these were just conference rooms, like with nothing in them. But because they were presented as like the secret spaces where a super important thing happens, or we see like the Situation Room, people feel good. They feel like important getting access to those, and think about how Mike Johnson is being treated like he's third in line to the presidency now. You'd think he wants to go back to the backbenches of Congress. So he's obviously willing to do anything. And, even though we're very critical, a lot of us are, about these security state agencies, there's also part of our brain that has been inculcated for a long time with the image that, what happens in the CIA, what happens in the NSA and the FBI is super sophisticated, the most highly secretive stuff, and important stuff that sometimes actually does catch criminals or terrorists or protects the country. And I think even for people who are critical of those agencies, once they're embraced by them and once they get welcomed in and presented with like top secret, super secret documents, they really get hypnotized by it. I remember when Obama ran for president in 2008, he presented himself. I'm a constitutional lawyer. Americans had turned against the excesses of the war on terror. He promised to uproot all these neocon and Bush Cheney domestic abridgments of civil liberties in the name of war on terror. And he gets into office, and within 2 months, he's in love with David Petraeus, and he has all these like Princeton and Harvard educated generals in his office. He loves special forces. He loves drones. And not only did he not uproot any of those programs, but he continued them and in a lot of ways expanded them. The very programs that he swore over and over that he based his campaign on uprooting. Remember, closed Guantanamo and all these interrogation programs. And none of that happened. And I think it was because he was so enamored too that he got to like have these secret briefings. These guys have been around for decades. They know how to manipulate newly elected presidents or newly elected House speakers.
Yeah, that's such a good point. We have to welcome back our radio audience in a second. And the Obama one is perfect because even more than Mike Johnson, a lot of his support back in 07, 08, I'm going to close down Gitmo. I'm going to give people a lot of time to read bills. It's out of control what Bush Cheney has done. And I think that McCain was going to lose no matter what. I think it was just an Obama wave year. But the margins of power, I think a lot of people said, hey, I think he had a lot of cultural libertarians that voted for him, a lot of privacy concerns, people that were concerned about privacy behind him, his support. And he did none of it. In fact, he was even worse in some ways for domestic spying and civil rights abuses than anything we've seen in recent memory. And so, Glenn, I want you to stay right there. I'm going to ask, you more than anybody else, impacted my views of domestic spying, your reporting. And I just wish that we'd be able to get some legislative reform because of it.